Okay. We have 15 people joining us. And here we're going to get started in like 2 minutes. I'm going to place the sign in and the link to the Padlet in the chat one more time. Make sure you get signed in, please. All right, can I get a quick thumbs up for those of you with your cameras on if you see my screen over here with the sign in and the Padlet? Great, thank you. All right, we kind of have a packed agenda today, so we're just going to jump into it. As always, we just ask that you be present and that we really start to challenge our thinking and think bigger as it relates to this is bigger than me. We're going to talk about some things that are going to not sit well with us today, I think. Not to like allude to a bad session by any means, but you know, we are all in this together and we are totally here to support you. So just please be ready to network. You know, if if anything comes up that challenges your thinking or makes you feel frustrated, please know that you have the space to kind of talk those things out.
You're right, Summer is the biggest star.
Good morning, Carol. If you wouldn't mind muting for us, we can do
What happened to that?
The chat in the back. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Okay, so we have the session started with the recording. We know that we've kind of flip-flopped back and forth with the scope and sequence. So we just wanted you to know that we do know that we have professional learning plans and implementation and talking about those still on the agenda. And today we were going to focus more on intervention.
I'm trying.
We really talk about intervention without talking about your overall tier 1 curriculum resources, programs, and materials. So you'll see kind of, it might seem like we're taking a step back, but also based on your comments from the surveys, we think that the approach that we're taking today will be most beneficial for you.
Yeah.
When he feels like doing something, he's gonna produce.
And Debbie, do you want to start running over the agenda and then
You have that other person mute. It's really hard.
It is hard.
So I accidentally muted Megan in the process of trying to mute Carol. So I'm gonna unmute. Megan, I didn't like force that on you. You can unmute now.
No,
right?
that's okay. I was just asking if you could mute that person because it was really hard to hear. So no problem.
Sorry about that. Okay, I think
That's
she
all
should
right.
she should be off now.
So the focus of today, we're going to be talking about some updates on the Ohio dyslexia legislation. And Jackie, can you put the sign in back in the chat,
No problem.
please? Somebody needs that. We're also going to be talking about tier 1 curriculum and as well as interventions that also support that core curriculum and follow a structured literacy base. And how do we know if we have the right curriculum for our kids? And so there's some tools that we're going to share with you that might be beneficial for those of you that are in the midst or getting ready to select a new curriculum. So we have an updated draft of the new dyslexia guidebook. So that Jackie's put the link in there for you. There were just some slight changes in there, really nothing that really affects the meaning from the first one, but there were some minor changes based on some some feedback given from other people and from the State Board of Education. So those changes have been made. So you're seeing the newest and brightest there. Jackie also put a cost study analysis link there, which is also on ODE's site. Now that's pretty interesting. They did a pilot with 4 districts, and they worked through these dyslexia requirements and best practices, and what would it cost a district. And so it's a cost analysis of those 4 districts that went through that pilot. So we have that linked for you so that you can take a look at it just to get an idea of what the cost might be for the districts. Now they did a nice job of picking like an urban, kind of a mid-size, like Marysville was one, and as well as some smaller districts so that everyone can kind of relate to the size of the district. This would vary depending on, like, do you need to purchase new curriculum? Do you have the right assessments? And if not, are you going to need to purchase them? Are you going to need to train your people in them? Of course, if you get a new screener, you're going to need to train all your people. But it does give you somewhat of a guide of what that's going to cost your district to align yourself to the structured literacy and dyslexia guidelines. Anything you want to add to that, Jackie?
No, I think if these are discussions that your district leadership teams are having, or your building leadership teams are having as it relates to selecting new materials, this would be a great resource to bring to those individuals, especially those that might not have a big hand in the area of literacy, but this is the kind of information that you need them to know in order to make movement towards a structured literacy program. You can get this in their hands. So I just put the link for the new guidebook in there. Sorry, I was kind of like running in circles trying to get the links. And then for the cost analysis, I just put that in there as well. Does anybody?
Jackie also did a really nice thing for you. I'm going to let her talk about it, but we were looking over the requirements for professional development and thinking through a path that might be helpful to you as you're trying to determine what your teachers may already have, because you probably have people in your districts who have already met some of these requirements that the dyslexia legislation is asking for. Jackie created this and she did a great job. So I'm going to let her explain this to you because it's a really great tool that she's sharing with you.
Yeah, so based off of our discussions last time, we were talking about what can we do now to start preparing for this. And y'all had said that it would be kind of helpful to have an idea of, okay, what meets these PD requirements, and how could I, possibly audit my teachers? So what we went ahead and did is we went through and looked at all the programs that have received that accreditation from IDA, the International Dyslexia Association. So for example, I'm going to take Diana because she mentioned that a lot of her teachers underwent that OG Orton Gillingham training. So if she gave this to her teachers, she could say, okay, if you attended any of these programs, say they attended Orton Gillingham, yes. For any of these programs, what you participated in, if the answer is yes, they would check that. Then you could have them list the amount of hours that they participated in that. And then if you want them to provide evidence, like their CEUs or something of that nature. And then so this goes through all the accredited programs on this page, and then it jumps down to the accredited universities. Okay, so you'll see all the universities sorted by state and what credentials or programs within those universities would meet parts of the 18-hour requirement. Okay, so you can use this however you want. I do want to make note that this is very specific to just those 18 hours, and it's not the part of the multi-sensory certification, as that will be something that you will adopt locally. So in addition to that, we keep talking about best practice and that all of this is the work that we're trying to do just in general. So there's another tab here that we added where, based on what the committee recommended that those 18 hours be around, all of those topics are covered right here and right here. So a teacher could, look at what their attendance sheet says, the areas that they talked about, and indicate if they have information or training on this topic. Then from there, if you wish to take it a step further and you say, okay, any teacher that completed something before April 2021 is allowed to meet this 18 hours. But what if they got it 10 years ago? Or, what if they forgot about it? Or what if their, knowledge really isn't lining up with some of the things that we're trying to move forward? So you could have teachers then rate themselves on a scale of 1 through 5, where they feel like they are in that area. So do you feel like an expert? Do you feel that, hey, I remember I had training there, but I was 7 months pregnant and a lot was going on and I don't remember anything, or whatever might be the case, So there's space down here for individual notes, and then you guys can then take this and do whatever you want with it if you make a copy and make it make sense for you. If you need specifics on maybe a way to determine who to give it out to first, we threw in the timelines for that professional development requirement here on this link. We just ask that you shouldn't be able to edit this, but I'm realizing I have a typo down here. I will fix that later. But we just ask that you do make a copy of this and don't just use this template. Are there any questions on this? It's directly linked in the Padlet and in the PowerPoint. Oh, Amy said, this is awesome. Can you share it with us? I gotcha. Here it comes. Thanks, Amy.
Hey, Jackie,
So-
just a trick if you ever share anything like this again and you don't want people to edit what you made, you take out that whole part where it says edit and you put copy, it'll force everyone to make a copy.
Cool. All right, thanks. The other thing I wanted to mention on here is that there are new organizations that are going to be trying to get this accreditation through IDA. So the accreditation process does take a long time. So for example, Keys to Literacy, it's a program that's almost like the, shorter version of Letters. For example, they just received accreditation, but it was a 12-month process. So this list is up to date, and it includes, I believe, the Keys to Literacy that was just added. So while this will continue to evolve and update, I wouldn't say that you if you're wanting to look into next year, that it's very likely that there will be new programs that will be identified, but they are directly linked up here so that you can always, double check yourself to make sure that nothing has been added. So this was updated just this month. Like I said, I actually just checked it yesterday, honestly. And so if you continue to be in this network too, as Debbie and I see things, we'll make sure that you know if certain organizations or programs have been added to the list.
Can I add one thing here too as well? Is that some things that we are seeing, we're seeing some programs come out and they're having the Ohio Department of Education's logo plastered on their flyers. And that has created a little bit of confusion, like, is this the 18 hours that the Ohio Department of Education said they were going to be putting out? So it's caused quite a bit of confusion. And so I have been in contact with ODE, and they have reached out to vendors and have also put it on their website that vendors are not to place the Ohio Department of Education logo on their flyers. So just kind of a word of warning that we are seeing some of that come out, and that makes sure that we're going back to the list that has been approved, and that vendors should not be having that stamp of ODE on the flyers that are going out, because right now we're seeing a lot of that. And they're working hard to get that corrected.
To that point, Debbie, it actually reminds me, would you guys I know people are like, well, should I sit around and should I wait for the ODE trainings that are going to be coming out, or, you know, should I move forward with other options? So I can give you guys a quick sneak peek if you would like as to what these modules are going to be looking like. Okay, we're good with that. So let me take a look at that. Give me one more moment. Okay, so Ohio is coming out with a series of learning modules. I do not know the guidance on what will be required as it relates to various grade levels, but I do know that they're, you know, developing these alongside the University of Cincinnati, and they're great interactive modules. So for example, this one's on the simple view of reading. You won't be able to access this. You need a passcode, so I won't be sending it, but what they'll do for every one of these sites is they'll explain to you and have resources on how to set up accounts for it, how to navigate through the modules, and where to find additional modules. So it will also let you know how far along you are in it. They're going to give, they also are creating a facilitation guide that will step through, hey, I'm a literacy coach, and how can I use this maybe in a hybrid model? How can I have teachers maybe watch a module and then have the opportunity to discuss at a teacher team? All of those things will be considered, and then the content is going to directly align to ensuring that those recommendations from the committee are being hit. So this will be a great opportunity for you. I also think it could be a great tool too, if you know that, like, hey, we have a lot of knowledge in this, but you know, maybe we want to do the pre-test to see where we are in our knowledge, so that you can kind of check maybe where you might have gaps moving forward. So I do just want to show you, while these will be the areas, this one's completed, the science of reading, and this one's completed, primary K through 5. This one will be coming up next, and then there will be additional for those early learning, family engagement, and English learner students. So those are coming along really nicely, and hopefully will be out soon. We want to kind of open the floor up to you now, though. What are you guys thinking? What are you doing? Are you hitting any barriers? Any great things happening as it relates to what you're working on now?
Thinking about last month, you know, with our hands being tied a little bit with waiting for the approval for the State Board of Education to make their final approval on this. But there are things that as districts we can be doing. You know, we can be creating those multisensory teams. We can be looking at our curriculum, and we can be looking at our assessments. We can be creating the process for certification. So, you know, just all of those kinds of components as it relates that we don't need to wait for. Like, where are you now, or where might you need support, or how is it going? I get it. It's a lot.
I do have a question. If we did our letters training beginning back in, I think it was 2017, would that count for those 18 hours, or is that too early?
Yeah, there's really just a blanket statement, Christy, as it relates to like anything a district completes before April 2022 would count. I'm going to get the exact verbiage and make sure that that's in the chat for you, but that's why if, you know, you want to go back and make sure that you're doing refreshers or anything like that, or test knowledge with any of the pre-tests that will be coming out, things of that nature, and just maybe embed that into, you know, your school improvement cycles so that you're not having to like, you know, do those same trainings at the beginning of the year. But it's pretty much April and anything before that.
Thank you.
Melissa, were you gonna say something?
Yes, just wondering about the screening measures, whether that list has been released yet or not.
Okay, so I have been following very closely the State Board of Education, had some conversations yesterday afternoon with some people who had an opportunity to actually listen into those meetings. We do not have good news for you on that. It looks like now those tier 1 screeners will not be released until mid-April at this point. We are having problems with, how do I word this? We're having trouble getting it passed through the State Board of Education. So there's a lot of pushback right now coming from balanced literacy proponents, and it is slowing the process down immensely. And so that is their struggle. And to that point, I did put together in our Padlet a link of some things that if you are a district who is in support of structured literacy and wanting this to move forward, there is some action that you can take to let the school board know that you are in support of this. And so there is a commissioner that you can call directly. You'll have to leave a message. No one is answering that machine, but they are checking their messages and recording them. And then there is a process of drafting a letter showing your support. And then there are 2 emails that you need to send that letter to. And then you need to specifically ask that they give a copy of that letter to every single board member. And in the second email, that you make sure that the Ohio Dyslexia Committee also gets a copy. So there's 2 separate emails. What we found is, as we were writing our letters of support to the individual board members, they were not receiving the letters. And so by taking it through this route, through ODE, they will ensure that the board members and the committee receive your letters. We're also going to ask that you spread this far and wide. So anyone you know that is in support, your teachers, other districts, we ask that you share this information so that they're also hearing the other side of the story. So I feel like right now they're really heavy getting response from the balanced literacy proponents. But I don't feel like they're getting enough validation and support from the other side, those of us who are really supporting structured literacy and know that it works and it's in the best interest of our kids. So I have linked that in the Padlet with the emails, the phone numbers and everything to make it easy for you, but we would ask that you do that right away prior to the April board meeting, which I believe is like the 12th of April, 11th and 12th of April. So if we can get that in their hands before that, that would be incredibly helpful.
Deb, I just went to go grab the link and you need to change the access requirements on it, I think.
Oh, okay. I will go do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for that. I'll share out a little bit here is that the 9 different districts that I work with are kind of all over the board as far as their PD hours go and training, et cetera. I have quite a few that are saying we're going to wait for the ODE modules, the free stuff, the time, constraints with completing modules in a hybrid or a self-paced, like that. And then I have a couple districts that say we're going to get all of our staff OG trained. We're going to set aside a week in the summer and just go forward with that. Use some of our CARES or ESSER money or whatever they have set aside for that. So they're kind of all over the place, but I do know like they were gung ho, and then they're like, okay, let's pump the brakes a little bit until we figure out kind of what's going on with the ODE modules, the best practice versus requirements, et cetera. So we're just to give a little feedback, we're kind of all over the place right now. But thank you for that organizational tool with PD, because I kept getting that question about, well, we were trained in this and we were trained in that, and part of our staff was trained in this and some are trained in that, and just, trying to figure out where everybody is when I'm dealing with, 9 different school districts. So
You're more than welcome. And I think that Melissa, I think paints a good picture of kind of what we're seeing around the region. And I think as leaders, y'all have an opportunity to, just know that what you're doing, if you're making strides towards structured literacy, that eventually this is just going to support your efforts. But we have the research. We already know what we need to be doing. So if you're making those strides in that direction, then, no need to kind of stop the ship. I get the reason to pause, of course, and things of that nature. But Melissa, you brought up a good question about the assessments. And I feel like, true show of hands real quick, who's really truly been able to read like all the details of the guidebook, 5 fingers, or like I've skimmed it kind of, and it's a lot. So I'm still kind of muddying through it. 1, or 1 would be I haven't opened it at all. So where kind of are we on a scale of 1 to 5? You put it in the chat.
You mean of how we read if we've read the dyslexia handbook and like what we understand about it? Is that
Right,
is
like
that your
how,
question?
right, like would it be relevant for us to pull up different components of it, or you're like, I know it like the back of my hand, 5, or I need more time with the 3s, 4s, 5. Okay,
Lots of 3s.
great. Thank you so much for your honesty. I feel like every time I've been able to open it and look at it, I open it again the next time and I'm like, oh, I didn't quite get that. Or, I see what they're trying to say there. So I just want to spend a moment to address Melissa's question as it relates to those screeners. Here are the skills that need to be measured for a universal screener that would meet the components of a tier 1 dyslexia screener. This is on page 18 of the guidebook. So one of the things I recently did, the emphasis changes on the skills that we're assessing as we advance through grade levels. So you're going to see this for K through 6. And then down here in this chart, you're going to see, make sure you're assessing this at the beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of the year as our skill progressions, change over time. So one of the things that I did is, remember like last week when we looked at, or last month when we looked at those ed reports for those different assessment tools, and we looked at that chart and what each tool has. I went in there and looked at iReady, and I looked at like Acadience, two assessments that I know schools are using. And the universal screeners usually hit on majority of these skill sets. And the ones that they didn't hit, the assessment vendor has an additional like add-on that would meet assessing that subskill. So your vendors are aware, and I think working towards making sure that these things are available, so there needs to be validity in a universal screener. So you might have like a universal screener, let's say, I'm just going to call it DIBELS 5000 because that doesn't exist yet. So they come up with like DIBELS 5000, and it hits these, phonemic awareness, letter naming, and letter sound correspondence, right? And they've tested that again and again and again. They've done all the validity and all of those scientific mumbo jumbo things they have to do, right? So they do that, and then they might introduce another one, DIBELS 6000, to ensure that these other components are added. So just when you're thinking disposition wise around assessments, we might have vendors that do come out with like a new, completely new assessment that's very specific for meeting all of the dyslexia screening requirements. But the reality is that it's probably going to be, you know, this living screener in addition to these things that we historically have not assessed, because research now tells us that we're missing, we have a gap in some of the things that we're looking at as we've continued to learn and grow around structured literacy. So I don't know if that helps with anyone's mentality, but it kind of helped me when I like dug into that. And I actually created like a box comparing the Acadience and the iReady, and then where I saw that there might be supplemental options available. And I will follow up with y'all should you want to walk through that same process with your current assessment tools. So I'll make sure that I send that in our follow-up should you find it helpful.
So you'll give us the actual document that you created, so we don't have to go back in and do that if you've already done it?
Well, caveat being, you know, I was able to wrap my mind around it by walking through and looking at it. So it might not make complete sense to you because it's tracked on how my brain was and the way that I looked at the reports, you know. So yes, Stephanie, you could, you know, take it and run with it, but you know, I'm also this neutral Switzerland source, so you know. But yes, use it to however you'd like.
Hey, also, I'm going to throw in Christy Schinover. I think you're on here. We were having a conversation earlier this week, looking at the assessment that they use, and also looking at that they are already offering screeners that are specific to dyslexia. So Christy, can you offer our conversation that we had earlier this week?
Absolutely. We were talking, in Swanton are currently using Dibble's 8th edition. And in looking at the dyslexia guidebook, it looks like Dibble's 8th edition does meet the criteria as for the universal tier 1 dyslexia screening. They do have an add-on though also that is free, which also measures the vocabulary, spelling, and rapid automatic naming. And we sort of weren't sure yet if when we need to screen for dyslexia in those windows, whether or not we would need to give the additional screening tools, vocabulary, spelling, and RAN, if that's what is considered the tier 1 dyslexia screener, or if just Dibble's 8th edition by itself is sufficient, because it does actually look like using the guidebook that just using regular Dibble's 8 without the add-ons does fill that criteria. Now, when we're talking about the tier 2 screeners, I think it kind of does give us a little bit more information to dive a little bit deeper, but we also have other diagnostic data that we use, such as we might give a PAST assessment or a Haggerty assessment for phonemic awareness or a phonic screener in order to dive a little bit deeper into those instructional needs.
Yeah, thank you. So that just followed with the conversation that we just had this week. So I thought maybe that might be helpful to some of you. Thanks, Christy.
I appreciate everything that everybody is saying here, and I agree that many of the screeners we're currently using will meet this criteria and, you know, or have the add-ons, et cetera. However, I take that caveat of that sentence right above that chart that says districts must select universal screening measures from the list of department-approved assessments for this purpose. And I have worked with Gifted for several years now, and even though we feel there were screeners on there in the past that aren't on there now, there over 30 years that I've been in education, I've seen a lot of this on the approved list,
Right.
not on the approved list. So, you know, like I said, I think I appreciate everything everybody's saying. However, the bottom line is that it has to be on that department approved list, and we don't know what that list is yet.
Right.
You're
Absolutely.
absolutely correct. Yep.
And do you all know that your vendors did have the opportunity to reach out and get on? Okay. I'll add that too. There's the process that a vendor can go through to be on the list. I actually think today might be the last day that they could say that they want to be considered for that. But I'll make sure that I follow up so that you have that as well. And then just so that there's clarity, there will be a list for tier 1, but there will not be like an approved vendor list for tier 2 assessments. Okay, any other thoughts before we kind of jump into the meat of today? Questions?
Would it be possible, or maybe you're already planning on that tier 2 list, would it be possible for the SST or a group of people that knows all these assessments that are out there better than we might, to put together a list of assessments that meet those criteria that are in that chart on page 20? Like, phonemic awareness on my head obviously goes to Haggerty's, but are there others? I mean,
Right, and you're so spot on, and we're actually having that discussion. We just had that discussion at the Literacy Advisory Council this last month. So that I don't want to get anyone too excited because we don't know exactly how this will work because it still needs to run through districts to field. But in addition to those modules that I was showing you, there is work for developing an app that supports a district walking through a decision framework for selecting assessments based off of how a student might score on a universal screener. So essentially a decision tree. However, we also know the discussion we were having that there's probably, at least 5 that I can think of phonemic awareness assessments that based off of the teacher's comfortability, the user's understanding of, scope and sequence of learning skills and things of that nature, that not everybody could use a universal decision tree in the same fashion, right? Because we're all entering the use of it in a different way. So right now we were discussing, if a child, let's say, has a deficit in phonics and you want to do a tier 2 assessment in phonemic awareness, you would select that, and then it would show you a list of possible phonemic awareness screeners, knowing that some might be for purchase, some might be for free. And so that's the holdup that we're talking about right now. Like, do we put the caveat as in, here are some options, but then locally you need to decide, what your teachers are familiar with, et cetera, what's works best in your spaces. So something like that is in the works, but I can't say exactly what that will look like, but it will be, the intent of it is for it to be user-friendly at a teacher level to help them understand how to walk through a diagnostic process, which is a big component of structured literacy. Great question, Stephanie. All right. Without further ado, let's just jump into today's content. Debbie, you're muted.
Just saw that. Thank you. Okay, so we're looking at the structured literacy component as we know that that is the most effective approach when working with students of dyslexia. In fact, if we talk about this, it's kind of been my soapbox a little bit, that actually this approach to literacy benefits all children, but it is vital for those that have markers for dyslexia. And I want to say again that remember that this legislation, the whole purpose of it is to make sure that we're providing intervention. And I don't mean those interventionists and being identified. The whole purpose is that we are not having kids identified, that we see those markers as early as possible so that we can really begin some diagnostic instruction so that they're never identified. That is the whole purpose of it, because we know that there's a huge percentage of our population of children that are on the spectrum somewhere for dyslexia. It's like autism, all right, it's a spectrum. So you have some on the minor and you'll have some that are very severe. We know that these challenges can be very significant if they're over on the far right of the spectrum. However, many of these can be overcome. I have 2 grandsons who are proof of this. They have had great instruction using structured literacy. And my oldest grandson was not identified until 5th grade, so very, very late. And yet is now, because of those structures and supports being put in place, is thriving in school. But however, some of the popular approaches to literacy, such as guided reading, are not effective. We know that. I mean, the data is pretty clear that is not effective for these children. So that is explicit teaching is really vital for all of our kids, but for our dyslexic population, it is absolutely vital if we hope to have them succeed. So when we're talking about structured literacy, we're really working on that word recognition side, and building those foundational skills and how all of these skills work together. So we've talked about phonology, talked about that sound symbol correspondence through phonics, moving into syllables. We've got the 6 syllable types, which can be really helpful for kids to understand. Working into morphology, so we've got those smallest units of meaning, those Greek and Latin roots that can be incredibly helpful. All the words that we can know and understand if we can understand those very basic units of meaning. And then that syntax, which the research has been pretty clear that syntax is really important. So this is the grammar, this is the arrangement of words and phrases, so that we have well-written sentences. And we know that kids really struggle to even read a compound sentence or a compound complex sentence. And then take it one more level to be able to produce those types of sentences is even more difficult. And so making sure that we're also providing instruction around both sides of that and discussing also those shades of meaning that we see in semantics. So, it's kind of like that, you say tomato, I say tomato. But we kind of look at that more deeply. So if we're looking at like, if I look at the word destination and then I use terminology like it's the last stop, they kind of mean the same thing, but there's a different shade of meaning when we're talking about those 2 things and seeing and working with children. So all of this works together, not separately, but all together to really build their understanding of how words work in our language. Okay, and then we have this guidance where we all know that it needs to be explicit, systematic, and diagnostic in our instruction. And I'll throw in multisensory as well. So when we're looking at this approach, we need that systematic. So we need that scope and sequence. We need it to be explicit so that we can provide that diagnostic teaching to all of our kids. And that leads to the assessments that we just talked about. Do we have the right assessment so that we can diagnostically teach? Is it giving us the knowledge that we need to have? And this all fits into that simple view of reading, because we're looking at the word recognition side, because that's where the majority of our kids are going to struggle. This is also the area where our children with dyslexic tendencies are going to fall. So we're really falling under there. That doesn't mean that language comprehension isn't important, because it is. However, there is a changing emphasis that we have talked about. So when we're talking about our K and 1 students, that word recognition side and that ability to decode is so critically important. And if they don't get it in that K and 1, they're never going to get it. So when I look at our intermediate teachers, so those teaching 2, 3, 4, they don't know how to teach those foundational skills. They were not taught that in their higher education. They have no idea what to do. I have had so many intermediate teachers reach out to me and say, gosh, I have kids that can't decode. They don't know their letters. And they have no idea what to do with those kids. So we have this changing emphasis not to leave out the language comprehension, because it's really important. But if we're picking and choosing, that word recognition side, that decoding has to be solid by the end of first grade. And that's why this whole, you know, some of the grants are really supporting those K-1 students. And this is why the dyslexia book really talks about that. But then those kids that didn't get it, how do we serve them going forward? So those skills are critically important. Anybody want to add anything to that conversation or thought? Okay, Jackie gets all the credit for this. She did such a fabulous job of putting together an activity that really kind of brings this to light for us. So I'm going to hand it off to her and thank her for her hard work in putting this together for us, because it's wonderful.
Well, Debbie, we work in a team. Debbie is the only one letters trained and has been running around like crazy doing letters trainings for the region. And I, you know, really appreciate her efforts there too. So, but thank you, Debbie. So we keep talking about curriculum. It's so important. You know, we need to have these certain components in place, but really, truly, why, right? When we think about, you know, just take a moment and read this quote. So when we hear teachers often say where they have the biggest issue is because they don't have enough. I heard Heidi, I can see Heidi's lips moving. We don't have enough time, right? We don't have enough time. And then it usually goes further. Okay, well, we don't have, you know, enough resources, or we have too many resources, or we don't have enough programs, or we don't know what to do with, you know, various groups. So having quality materials, district leaders, building leaders, providing your teachers with quality materials for all learners in their classrooms are going to give back teachers that critical time that they, you know, typically oftentimes supports the reason as to why they got in teaching in the first place, right? So that they can focus their energies on their students. They can focus their energies on their families. They can, you know, build partnerships, make things accessible, and really embed the components of, you know, the kids that they have sitting in their seats. So I think we take a different lens. Like, we have this huge push now for getting, like, you know, an aligned program. Like, we got to think about it through a different lens. We have to think about what we're trying to repair from past practices as we move forward through this selection process. So while you're, you know, talking to teachers about this, what disposition shifts do we need to make? And I think, you know, it would be valuable to start with, how do we define curriculum? I'm sure if we all unmuted right now and we gave a definition of what we think curriculum is, we're probably all going to have a different definition. But the reality is, it's because curriculum is so encompassing, right? And then what have our local practices focused on and called curriculum, you know, is often what is going to give us that definition. So within curriculum, we have our learning progressions and our standards. We have our programs, our resources, materials. We have our assessments, and then we have our lessons and activities, right? And there's probably some things that I might, you know, not be considering, like, let's say, like adaptive AT devices, things of that nature that could also be on here. So this curriculum is just all encompassing. So for today's purposes, as we start to talk about curriculum, I want to make sure that we intentionally all know what we're using that word for. So we're going to be talking about the selection of a specific program, and we're going to fine tune it specific to looking at that foundational skill and area for phonics. Okay, so this, we know, is not all of what makes a curriculum tool accessible, right? And it may not include what we know we need across all tiers of our system, but it's, if we're going to start talking about interventions, we have to know what all kids are first getting so that we know what might be missing, right? So when we're talking about curriculum today, we're going to make that correlation from curriculum to program, but that is not the whole crux of what makes curriculum curriculum. So like I mentioned, we're going to look specifically at phonics, right? Historically, we have a phonics program, but we want to, remind you all that when we're saying phonics, we're talking about various components of what is essential for a structured literacy program. Okay, so we see pieces of components of phonics embedded in all three of these skill sets. And that in order even to get to these, we have to have that phonology component too, right? And they kind of all have to happen together. So when we're looking at certain phonics instruction programs, a good structured program is probably going to have all parts of this wheel. So even though we're explicitly trying to pull out phonics, we might see more supports, more alignment and blending of things if we're looking at a program that would meet the requirements of structured literacy. So before we kind of look at these tools specifically, I just want to look at an instructional guide for an MTSS program, looking at the decoding components of what we need to get kids to develop that phonics instruction. So there's a direct link in here, and I also put it here. But before we get to the link, or before we get to looking at that specifically, I wanted to let you know that this intensive intervention center, they have examples of what each subskill for literacy and math could and should look like, from your core instruction to secondary intervention, intensive intervention, to possibly using modified standards, and then shows you what that looks like across that sequence. So this one specifically that we're going to look at is specific to that decoding phonics piece. So I'm going to pull it up here. I'll pop the link in the chat for you as well if you need to zoom in any further. I'm going to give you a couple minutes just to read through it and note any differences that you see across these tiers. What changes? Okay, jot some things down. I'll give you a few minutes. Okay, so either unmute or throw it in the chat. What are you seeing is changing as you progress to more intensive supports? maybe what changes or what is different from tier to tier, what's added, what's considered. The use of the word explicit, moving from a class-wide focus to small group or individual focus, increased progress monitoring. So we have time or progress monitoring as it relates to amount of how often, right? Any other things? These are all great. Intensity of breaking down skills. Yes, love that. More opportunities for practice, focusing on foundational skills. Hitting prerequisite skills, absolutely. Wonderful. So think for a moment, if you have a student who's been identified, they score below grade level in your, let's say, historically a yellow or a red zone on your universal screener. What is the next step? Do your diagnostics or your next steps consider which of these changes could take place to support that child? Or because they fell in this category, they go to this intervention? Any thoughts? Anybody want to share? So as you can see, there's a lot of things that we can consider that would need to be individualized or diagnosed in order to determine where we can fill our instructional gaps or, you know, make up for a missing component of a child's foundational skill development. So red flag a little bit if you start to hear your teacher say, you know, we always use X program for tier 2 and we use X program for tier 3. That's all fine and dandy, but we need to dig. Are they using that program after they have determined where they need to, you know, be more explicit? If the child needs repeated practice, and then using the program to provide that additional, you know, support determined by, you know, whatever component might be identified? Or are we just saying score low here, this program here? Okay, so that diagnostic piece of the structured literacy is what we're really going for when we're talking about intervention. So today, that's the reason why we're looking at our core instruction to see what we might have that can either, you know, maybe already be a part of our core instruction that can support these secondary interventions or intensive interventions that we see on this progression. Maria asked, where is this from? Maria, I think there's a link up just like 3 big scrolls up. It's the intensive intervention. It's a national center. They have these MTSS structures for all of those foundational literacy skills, and they also have them for the foundational mathematics skills. And you know what, Maria, now that I check myself, I didn't give the direct link to the center. So here we go. So it's this site right here. So underneath there, they have so many amazing resources. But I will caveat that if you're going to use some of these things, like more specifically, you would be remiss not to walk through the modules that accompany them, because a lot of the vocabulary that they use when they start to get into like specific strategies, you're not going to be familiar with. So, or you might be familiar with, but they're not the traditional words that we use. So there is all of these lists, Maria and everyone else that I was just talking about right here. I'll put this direct link in for all of those skills that you can find. Okay, this would be a great way to progress monitor, great thing for literacy coaches to utilize, or any principals who are doing walkthroughs to look for specific components within instruction. Okay, so before we can really look at our interventions, we need to know what we currently have available. I feel like every school I've ever worked at, there was a stack or a whole room full of books that I just was like, I have no idea what's in there or what, you know. And oftentimes being an intervention specialist, it was like, I'm like, oh, where are my materials? They'd be like, go to that closet, right? And I just had to kind of pick through. So when we're starting to consider curriculum choices, what do we have currently available? So looking at a variety of programs as well, in addition to that, is going to help determine what you may need. So vetting one program, I would encourage you to look through the lens of multiple programs that are available. So today we're going to look at system support. So what are some programs that we can look at? And then, moving forward in the future, we're going to look at individual learner supports. So what are some, instructional routines that I could embed in my practices that are going to meet some of those interventions that we see across that MTSS framework. And we'll talk about, maybe more specifically how to select a specific condition and a skill for a learner in the future. But we need to first look at what we have in the core. So when we're talking about what makes effective instruction, we need to make sure that we're looking at least 3 things. So this is from an article that is called Equitable ELA Instruction, and it is linked in the Padlet. And one of the things that, or the 3 things that they said that we need to focus on is you need to adopt and align curriculum. Once again, that word not being used in the holistic sense, right? So we need to adopt and align series of materials, programs, and resources. Then we need to provide instructional supports that fosters all students' persistence with grade level reading and thinking. Okay, that's more of that individual component as it relates to instructional strategies in the classroom that we'll get to next week. And then we need to provide targeted intervention in addition to and in service of grade level content. Okay, what's happening in that general curriculum setting. So today, we're going to look more specifically at how to look to determine if a program is aligned, and then that's going to lead us into some discussions around providing targeted interventions. So when we pull that apart even further, what do we need to consider when we're looking at determining if a curriculum is aligned? What does it need to be aligned to? So we need to screen our programs, tools, and materials for alignment to our standards. We need to screen our programs, tools, and materials for accessibility, right? Can the learners that are in our buildings, can they access this? And we can think about that through a variety of lenses. And then we need to screen our programs, tools, and materials for alignment with reading research, right? Right now, the components of what we have for structured literacy, for example. And then other evidence-based practices as well. But we're going to see those instructional evidence-based practices in a lot of our programs anyway. So I pulled apart 2 different things for us. Quick show of hands, who was the links that I sent out? I know I sent them out late, but I said I would suggest printing out these items. Who has those printed or available with them right now? Okay. Okay, great. If you did not get those printed, that's totally fine. Go to the email and I hyperlinked all the documents that we're going to be using for this activity in there. So when we're going to be using these to look at some programs. So this program on the left is a full program called Rooted in Reading that you can purchase off of Teachers Pay Teachers. Okay, this is an actual program that a friend of mine who's a parent who lives in closer down towards Athens, this is what her son's teachers were using, and this is what the whole school had adopted as their program. Then we have Core Knowledge Language Arts. Okay, this is a free program online, but you do have to print it off. They also have ways that you can order it so that you can get like the actual text. So for today, we know that like programs can be really thick, and we're going to specifically be looking at the teacher's guides parts. So both of these come with like worksheets for kids to go through, and like little maybe things to cut up and things of that nature that I will make sure that we have in the Google Drive, and we do have most of that there if you want to look at it further. But for today's purpose, we're going to look at the teaching guides of these two programs in the area of phonics. Okay. We're using a variety of tools, evaluation tools, to walk us through that. So this first document, Adopt and Align Program, that kind of looks like crappy and organized in a weird way, are me cutting and pasting pieces of different tools because we're looking specifically at the phonics component of these lessons. Okay, so this is, and I have direct links to these evaluation tools for you as well. So we're going to be using this. And then you're going to be using this overview tool. It looks like a document or like a chart. Okay, at the top of it, both programs that we're going to be looking at are up there. This is for you for guided note purposes, should you want to take notes in the areas that we're going to kind of dive into. Now we're going to just walk through this together. I don't have like, us in groups and things of that nature. So please, unmute. What do you see? Do you have a question? What does this mean? Like, we're going to just kind of muddle through this together. So, oh, and I was running by the seat of my pants and like doing this like finishing a lot of this last night. So I left off some of those reports here, but I know they're linked in the Padlet, some of those other evaluation tools. So overview of what is rooted in reading, this curriculum tool. Can anybody unmute and just read how they advertise this program?
Well, just looking under, reading right from there, the overview, it says this is an overview of the comprehension, phonics, and grammar skills that will be addressed throughout the series. We may have some smaller skills throughout the weeks, but these are the major concepts that we hit for each specific book. Please note, these may change as we finish and finalize the units.
Thank you. And up here too, it says, this will transform your ELA block. It'll give you everything you need to facilitate a love for learning in your classroom, including all of those supplemental things that I said we would not be looking at. And each week, the way that this is organized, the teacher will read the book throughout the week and model how to think deeply, ask questions, and then they'll focus on different comprehension skills and strategies that will take your little learners on a reading journey like never before. So all lessons are aligned to Common Core, and then they indicate here, this can be used as a standalone curriculum or as a supplemental curriculum. You can do all of what you include or pick and choose the activities that work best for you and your students. Here's the overview of the Core Knowledge Language Arts. Their curriculum is broken into, like, you have like listening and learning, and then you also have like a skills strand. So they have two different parts. Okay, so this is the overview for that. The skills strand teaches the mechanics of reading. Students are taught systematic and explicit phonics instruction as their primary tool for decoding written English. By the end of grade 2, students have learned all of the sound spelling correspondence in the English language and are able to decode written material they encounter. In addition to phonics, students have been taught spelling, grammar, and writing during the skills strand. So based off of those two introductions, are there anything that stands out as a strength if you were looking at this, either one of these programs, or anything that stands out as a possible area of question?
Well, what popped out for me for the CKLA is it says students are taught systematic and explicit phonics instruction, and that's kind of what those are two words that you want to see when you're picking a curriculum.
Absolutely, yes. Was there anything you noticed in
On the-
the rooted for reading?
Yeah, on the flip side of her comment in the rooted to reading, it was like, you can do some or all, this is standalone or supplemental. That would not, I guess in my mind, imply systematic.
Right, absolutely, right. So what does their scope and sequence really look like, right?
I also question on the rooted in reading where it says it's going to give you everything you need. I feel like when we go to those extremes, that's a big, I guess, promise.
Right, and
Because no curriculum has everything you need ever.
Right, exactly.
right, because, yeah, because we know that curriculum is more than just a program, right? There's a lot of other things that we need to look at when we're considering what will make up the components of our curricula. Okay, so we're going to start walking through this. Let's the packet for the Adopt Align program that we had pulled out, you have your guided notes. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look for alignment in the standards. Okay, so on this standards piece, right in the middle is what a grade 1 student, this is a unit for grade 1. This is what a grade 1 student will need to know. So I did want you to just kind of see the progression, because knowing what happens before and what happens after as we develop skills is going to help us to determine if a program has intervention considerations within it. Okay. So I want to make a note as to how these things are organized. There is the lesson 1 for the CKLA. Okay. And there is a lesson for the reading route. There is then those additional overview considerations, like this would be this colorful one with the baby font. This is their scope and sequence for reading, rooted in reading. And this is the scope and sequence with the red bar on top that you're going to see for the CKLA. Sorry, I think I held up. I see eyebrows growing. I held up these two things, right? But I don't think you guys have these, right? You just have the pieces of them that I put in each of these and stapled together, so you wouldn't have so many sheets. I apologize. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go on mute. We're gonna look through both of these items. This round, you're gonna like kind of read it more for content, right? Both programs, informations. Thinking about it through the lens of that we're going to discuss, does this align to the standards first, but you might just want to make notes of other things you see. Okay, so I'm going to start by putting 15 minutes. Do you think that's appropriate to look through both of these? Yeah, I'm going to put 15 minutes on the clock, get an idea of both of these curriculum tools, and then know that if your brain needs to flip through the other areas that we're going to consider alignment to, please by all means look at the rest of these. But we're going to first talk about, does it align with standards? About 5 more minutes. About less than a minute, wrap up our thoughts. Okay, did you guys have enough time to kind of look at both of those curriculum teacher guides? Okay. Great. So I wanted you guys to just be able to dive in and kind of see them more holistically, and then we'll break down different tools and I'll bring you to those. But the reason why we wanted to break it down this way is because, like, there's not one great program. You know, there are going to be different tools based off of what you need to look for based off of your learners and what you know you have in your current program. Okay, so I don't want to say that one tool is better than the other when it comes to auditing or screening a program for its effectiveness. So just starting with the basic standards, I know that you can't see this big, but if you have the PowerPoint, you should be able to see it a little bit better. What are we knowing about the standards, or what are we knowing overall? If we don't even get to some of the other tools, but you saw something just on your own accord that made you say something great or something that could need work in either rooted in reading or core ELA.
So Jackie, I don't know if I wasn't really seeing this or I missed something, but one has them listed everywhere and one didn't list them at all. I mean,
Right, so which one is?
so
listed?
the rooted in reading, I didn't see where they put any standards there at all. I saw a lot of activities and things to do, but I didn't see where they listed the standards.
Did anybody else see where they might have listed the standards?
I saw them underneath it's our second page of the handout where it says phonics, and right next to it, it says Common Core. It's circled in red, and it basically, there's a huge focus on RF 13B or 1.3B, sorry. That's the only, out of that list of standards given, that's the only one that I could find was a focus of 1.3.
Right, so Maria, it's like very little, very basically there kind of at the end.
I see where it is now. Okay. Okay. I see a little bit.
Okay, what else are we seeing?
It looks like in the core knowledge alignment, it looks like throughout the units, or I'm sorry, throughout the lessons in unit 3, it's almost cyclical, like they just come back periodically to the different standards. So it's not just hit once, it's kind of once here and then a couple weeks or a couple lessons and then again.
And I mean, does anybody have like the components, like the abbreviations that we have for standards memorized, like RF 1.3?
Reading foundations.
Right, so it's reading foundations, but I would think that you would need to be able to see what the standard says, right? To know exactly like what 1.3 is hitting. So on the core knowledge, it spells out what standard you're gonna be hitting, and like not just the number, but also what the standard is, which I found very helpful when I was going through this. And anything else? Okay. All right, so now that we've kind of gotten a holistic idea of what is made up of both of these programs, I think it's going to be easier for us to answer some of these other pieces. So I want to bring you to some other evaluation tools. So we can look at something as it aligns to the standards, and the second thing we need to look at is accessibility. So Ocali has put together a alignment tool, which embedded in this document, you can get to the actual Word doc so that you can download it, but I just took screenshots so that you only had to print or you had to print less pages. But they have things for look-fors, right? And what you're looking for is probably going to be based off of what you know your spectrum of learners are. Some of us, you know, might need accessible reading materials. This number 2, audio and video materials, maybe with specific, you know, images or different items throughout. We also have, or they also mention accessibility features like text to speech, digital notes, screening readers. Those are all going to change based off of, you know, are you a tech savvy school, or 1, for your core instruction, but 2, do you have learners who you know have like a robust need for those accommodations? Oftentimes when we're thinking about the K2 space, we know that physical, you know, interaction with print and book materials is going to be more effective. So you might not be looking for some of these components very explicitly in a kindergarten program but you might, when you start thinking more towards 3rd grade and up, some of these accessibility features might be good for your core instruction, but also for the specific individual needs of identified learners. So all of this is going to kind of vary based off of what you're looking for and what you need. Is there any one of these numbers that you notice that stands out to you that is a component of some of the supports that are embedded in these core instructional programs? So take a look at this list.
Looks like the core knowledge alignment has a lot more things embedded in it. I mean, it's got the flip book, it has books that they read. Looks like there's a lot more embedded within that than the other one.
I agree. A lot more considerations and instructional practices kind of throughout as it relates to individual learner needs. Another thing I wanted to point out to you all that is not in this, but as an appendix tool to the core knowledge program, is in your PowerPoint. Let me pull it up. Some of the other things that are just for teachers outside of those activity considerations that I was telling you about that are components of both curriculums, but for teachers, they also have assessment and remediation guides that parallel each unit. And then they have what they, this is one huge comprehensive appendix of ways to scaffold instruction for learners. So I just took a unit 3 from a kindergarten lesson, and what they're supposed to do in that is, you know, the focus of the lesson is on the position and the shape of your mouth, lips, teeth, tongue, and as it relates to when you open your mouth and close your mouth for producing different sounds, right? So that phonological development. And what they say, so like the procedure is the teacher's going to say a word, she's going to have the kids repeat or echo the word, and then they're going to watch their lips and tongues and how they move in a mirror. So they have additional AIR, which is a research program or a research organization, has additional scaffolds that you can do if you know that kids are having a hard time. So let me show you how to be more explicit with your demonstrating, and that you could embed these into your tier 1, right? So to Debbie's point earlier, like these can be those explicit interventions, especially for learners who we know might not have had that foundation of pre-K or had COVID was their first year in kindergarten. These are the types of things that we're going to have to, you know, be more explicit about. So for example, this first one, When we make sounds, our mouths point to your mouth, our lips point to your lips, and our teeth and our tongue are in a certain position or place. Let's all point to these items. So it's like scaffolding. And this is a part of core knowledge for every single lesson. Okay, so it's going to give you those extensions. The other thing that they have is they explain to teachers, and it's once again a huge thick thing, but I didn't want to bombard you with too many copies. Understanding their approach to phonics, why they've developed the scope and sequence in the way that they have, why they have decodables over only, you know, read aloud books or other leveled books, why they suggest word walls and certain reading activities. So all of these things are additional supports to support a teacher in their instructional routines. And then they have a series of decodables available to that you can purchase. This one, Christy Schenover so nicely let us borrow. But it has an ongoing stories, like this one's Gran, and it follows the scope and sequence with a bunch of decodables in one book. Okay, so those are additional supports that they have for specifically phonological awareness and phonics. So if we look back at this accessibility list after seeing that, we bring our attention to some of the components like item 7. Having access to that core curriculum for students even with complex needs and communication needs. These tools are what's going to be a way to support that, so our students with complex needs are not receiving an alternative curriculum, right? How can you use this current curriculum to meet the needs of all your learners? So this is something to consider, but where I really want to spend the meat of our time walking through things together are these ed reports. Okay, when we finish today, I have a full ed report for both of these tools completely filled out, right? That you'll be able to use, but I wanted to walk through specific parts of each one. So the review tool for the ed reports, they have one specific for English language arts for foundational skills. They also have one for, you know, the language comprehension skills, and then they have like a holistic one that covers all of the skills. But what we've done is broken down. So in this guide, they have those foundational skills embedded for all criteria: print concepts, phonological awareness, phonics, which we're going to look at right now, word rec, and then additional things as it relates to accuracy and fluency. Then, after looking at the alignment to those research best practices, they have, okay, now let's look at alignment as it relates to implementation, support materials, and assessment. And they have what we know are best practices for a structured literacy program as components of this second part of the tool. Okay, so if we go back to our alignment considerations document, we pulled out the phonics one. Okay, so what we're going, the way that they do this is they score, they have a total of score for each section. So for phonics, a curriculum for them to completely meet expectations, the highest point that they can get is 20. And then you'll see there's a key down at the bottom, right? So you need to get 16 through 20 points or to meet, and then, you know, it goes accordingly. So which curriculum do you guys want to look at first? We're just going to go through and answer these as a group. Pick a number. Again, either throw it in the chat, unmute. But let's go through these components of phonics. No one's itching to do one over the other? All right. Let's start with, oh, Amy, were you going to say something? Oh, no?
No,
Okay.
I just realized my camera was off.
Okay, thank you. So let's start with the rooted in reading. Okay? And if we see something that might be in there, we can point each other to it, okay? So rooted in reading. Materials, I guess we could just go back and forth between each one, okay? Rooted in reading. Materials emphasize explicit phonics instruction through systematic and repeated modeling. How many points are we thinking? For rooted in reading. Amy put 0. Anybody else? So in order for 0, okay, yeah. So in order for it to be explicit and systematic, you know, I'm going here to Monday and I'm looking for like this is the all I get for instruction, and I'm only focusing on like one word family for the entire week. Okay, and it doesn't follow a previous order. It doesn't tell me, you know, how they're developing or adding on to each other. So I would say a 0 as well. So now let's look at the other one. Materials emphasize explicit phonics instruction. Let's look at core knowledge. So are they being systematic? Are they following? Great, I see 4s in the chat. Great. And would you say that there's repeated modeling throughout the lesson and bringing back to these items? I agree. And then we're also seeing before they talk about the foundation of the sounds, what does it have in the lesson? Like before they give you like an actual letter, what do they do first? At the beginning, so like where it says, well, they'll introduce a sound, right? We know that they're starting like off with the foundation of their spelling, but they're telling students explicitly, like, we are doing this. We're gonna look at tricky words and we're gonna figure out why they're tricky. And we're gonna tell you, you know, what that means as it relates to our English language. That's being explicit, right? As opposed to, you know, I'm a tricky word and I'm just a tricky word for being a tricky word. And, you know, now we're going to do a little dance or, you know, an activity with it of repeated practice. They're telling you explicitly. So 1G. So let's look back at rooted in reading. Materials include frequent practice opportunities for students to decode words. What are we
Which
thinking?
program are we looking at first? Is it
Rooted in
the,
reading again? Yeah, we'll look at rooted in reading first.
well, it gives them, I guess this is where it's sort of tricky, I guess. It gives them practice to decode, but it's not very explicit what they're doing.
Right.
Like Monday, you know, it says introduce the word family of the week and allow students to brainstorm, you know, words with EN. Well, that's not being very explicit, because then you show them the list after they generated a list. And then for making words on Tuesday, you know, you give them the letters EN and they have to make new words. I have Isabel Beck's like, but her model is like ingrained in my brain, and we don't do that. You know, the teacher explicitly tells them what letters to move to make a new word. So there's practice, but it's not very good practice. So I don't know what I would rate it. What's everybody giving them? I don't know.
Right, so there is there's frequent practice opportunities. Would you say that what they're doing in these activities is decoding words?
For me, what stands out in this one is that they have a book, but it's not decodable. And so in order to have some activities where they can actually practice what has been just taught to them, you really need those decodables to support that learning. And that's really lacking in those lessons there. They have a book that they're referring to throughout the week, but it's not decodable.
Perfect, agree. And it doesn't, then the skills that they're practicing, are they really decoding? They might be, you know, so partially meets, maybe somewhere between a 0 and a 2. Okay, great. And then what are we thinking for CKLA?
Well, I thought they were given a lot of chances to practice. I mean, after they teach, they're working on the oo sound, the double O. They work through in pairs. There's a vowel code flip book. There's practice with a workbook, and kind of what caught my eye at the end, it's the very last page, is that it's giving supplement materials of words that you could use if the students need, you know, more practice. They had word chains, phrases and sentences. I mean, I just saw lots of different things you could use to practice.
Absolutely, right. And that's going to be great for a teacher, right? Because how could you remember all of those words and use them, right? So those repeated groups and those moments are going to be, you know, available to the teacher, and she's not going to, or he's not going to have to think through what to utilize. So what do we say? Four. Amy's saying 4. Okay, was Stephanie saying 4? Okay. All right, and then the items go on and on, you know, as you kind of walk through these. But I don't want to, for the sake of time, go through each of these items and not get to some of these implementation considerations for each of these tools. Okay, so now we're talking more about guidance for implementation, right? Do our instructional routines, our materials tell us instructional routine considerations and include a scope and sequence? Okay, so knowing this was the materials for the teacher's guide, and then knowing that we have these materials for CKLA in addition to those items that we previously noted, what does Rooted in Reading have that meets T or 2A? So we know it includes a teacher's edition, right? But in that teacher's edition, does it use annotations and suggestions on how to present the content to students? Right.
Not really. Well, not from what I can see. Unless I'm missing something.
Right. So I mean, it says allow kids to brainstorm, and then show them this list. So I wouldn't really say that pertains to instruction. It's more activity based, right? Like a giving and receiving. So in the teacher's edition for CKLA, do we see additional suggestions for content and other materials to use? We definitely do. Okay. And then the other component for phonics instruction that you won't have the ability to really look at. So we know that we could go through these items together, but then making sure that we have those decodable texts that Debbie previously mentioned. That is going to give us that repeated ongoing practice and develop those skills through a scaffolded approach that would be supported via a scope and sequence. So then Amy noticed those new decodable words that we could utilize. We could utilize, you know, those. We can embed them into our writing. We can embed those things and practices. And if we have a morning routine that we utilize, all of those things could just be embedded into our units for the week based off of the new introduction of the various sounds and letter sound correspondence. So, and then I, once again, didn't want to get into a wormhole because I knew we wouldn't have a bunch of time, but considerations for assessment and differentiation. So if we go back to this item, this chart here, and let's say that we had rooted in reading. We are getting a lot of zeros, right? And most of the things for that core instructional practice did not meet these components. So if we had that for our core instruction, would that core how can we select an intervention or additional materials or programs to support interventions when we know that our interventions need to be in service of our core curriculum? So if we do not have good core curriculum, what's the likelihood that we're going to have good interventions and supports? Right?
Right, and another point to that, Jackie, is that if we don't have good core curriculum, we will probably be over-identifying kids for the tier 2 and tier 3 instruction, probably based on not necessarily a disability, but they haven't been taught what they needed to know. And so we're going to see increases in tier 2 and tier 3 because of deficits in tier 1 instruction.
Absolutely. And then if we have a good quality core curriculum that includes a lot of the criterion that we see in that ed report, do we necessarily have to adopt a whole nother program the second a student is identified for tier 2 or tier 3 supports? No, right? So when we're thinking about funding and knowing that we might not have funding available, where are we putting our money in this, intensive intervention space? Oftentimes those specialists and things are selecting and spending monies, with the best of intentions on products and programs that have no alignment or no service to that core. So what does our core currently have? And then what do we need to take off, right? What do we need to replace with what we know is already going to be more effective? Should we have, a pretty defined scope and sequence of curriculum materials available to us? So the CKLA is all online and it's free. One of the best ways to navigate to those items, those curriculum resources, is through Unbound Ed. Okay, here at this website, I will put the link in. You can toggle between what grade level you're looking to explore for curriculum materials, select the grade level, so like what we did today. As I told you, we looked not at the listening and learning today, but we looked at the skills and the phonics, and then they're going to have an overview of all the things that are downloadable and available for that curriculum. Okay, so this is a great tool to utilize, especially if you don't want to call vendors and look at different, items and have someone emailing and calling you all the time. You can utilize some of these free resources. The Ed Reports foundational skills are linked in our Padlet, and they're also accessible and available through Ed Reports. Where you can find blank copies of these tools, but compare materials, okay? So the follow-up, which I put also in our Padlet, is a full, extensive review or report of the Amplify Core Knowledge ELA curriculum that we just looked at. This gives you all the details and why, what evidence is in there, okay? So they've done this for you, but at what level does this need to be done in your buildings to maybe help change those dispositions and turn those, you know, the thinking around as it relates to maybe moving to a structured literacy program. Also, my friend who was mad that her son was not being provided the instruction he needed, did a handwritten one for the Rooted in Reading. So those are also linked in the Padlet, but I will call attention to those in our follow-up email. I know that we kind of struggled a bit today to kind of get through that collectively, but it pulls us back to when you're looking at things, and this is where we're going to kind of go next time, is when we're thinking about interventions, we need to move our mind away from thinking about programs and start thinking about how effective the strategies are, the amount of time and repeated practice we have to it, its alignment to our current programs and resources and materials, our ability to transfer skills over time, and then additional supports to make sure that it's comprehensive and has ability to be individualized and consider behavior across our full MTSS frameworks. So we will kind of dive into this part and these considerations more specifically at our next session. So these are things that we have coming up, looking at that taxonomy rubric, looking at instructional routines that are going to benefit all kids, and then some maybe individual considerations. It's really hard to get to know how to pack all of these in and to know what to focus on. So your feedback seriously guides what we select. So please, please, please take a moment to take this survey. Tell us, you know, today I was going to be like, okay, we're just going to try to be a little bit more informal. Was that effective? Was it not? I need to know because I know how I feel on my end, but you know, you guys being the ones that need to get your hands on things are going to have a better way of telling us. We also have an extra question in there. We're starting to consider the PD for next year. Any input that you have around availability, time of year, hybrid models, online, in-person locations, having issues with subs, we left a question in there to start getting your thoughts on that because we want to make sure that we're doing the best that we can for, you know, the network, but also all of our regional literacy PD and supports. We want to hear from y'all before we start planning that out. So sorry, I think I might have gone over by like a minute or two. But I really appreciate y'all all being here and walking through that with us together. Oh, and your books. Your books have been ordered and I think we're gonna bring them all here first because we have to put some silly sticker on them or something. And then we will get those sent out to you. So I will let you know via email when those are en route. Thank you guys so much. We'll stick around if you have any questions. Please, please take that survey.
I have a question. Besides the obvious cost, that CKLA, you can, that it is what you showed us. Is it exactly also the amplified paid version?
That's a good question. Debbie and I were wondering if like it looks different formatting wise or something. I don't know. I will say that the stuff that's free with the Core Knowledge Online, it does seem like you have like it's in print form. So if you purchase Amplify and they have an online component, it's probably going to look different. But the meat of it should be the same.
Just
Yeah,
wondering.
we were just having a discussion about that too, and we were seeing some slight differences between the print version versus what we could see online. I worried about the cost of printing when you're talking about a whole district, the durability.